over the last 6 months, I've become weirdly internet famous for talking a lot about Harry Styles. So much so that I was going to call this talk How a Former Partner in a Law Firm Came to be Quoted in Teen Vogue on the subject of Harry Styles, but that was too long for a promotional tweet. So what I thought I'd do this morning is talk a little bit about how on earth that happened, a little bit about my secret double life, and how if we're going to achieve equality in our industries, I think maybe we need to get back to the very first things that we loved. So I thought I'd start by talking a bit about my public journey and my private journey and how those things collided in some interesting ways. My public journey was pretty traditional. I graduated law school, I climbed a very predetermined career ladder. I worked and studied and traveled internationally, and on paper, at least, I was a corporate finance success story doing large-scale mergers and acquisitions. My private journey was a little bit different, and it wasn't something that I ever really talked about. I've always been a giant nerd. I've loved computers and what we can do with them since I got my very first one when I was 10 years old. And when the internet came along, I fell in headfirst. I managed to convince my parents that we needed the internet at home in 1994, which was pretty early by New Zealand standards, and as you can see, pretty expensive. And the very first places that I began to hang out in online were fan spaces, sites dedicated to TV shows and books and movies, and I devoured fiction and art that was being created about the things that I loved. And in order to participate in those online spaces, I had to teach myself some technical skills. For example, in 2001, I was living in Hong Kong, and at that stage they had a really terrible selection of English language television. And I was obsessed with The West Wing. I mean, completely obsessed. So I managed to find a guy in a news group in the States who I could pay to record me the episodes of The West Wing on VHS. And then he would post them to me in the actual mail. And then I worked out how to connect my computer to my VCR so that I could record the episode into a digital format, burn it to CD, and then post it in the actual mail to a friend of mine who lived in London. I was a terrible pirate. But as the internet evolved, I had to keep moving with these technical skills. I started out in news groups and then graduated to mailing lists and then joined LiveJournal. I taught myself basic photo editing so that I could make avatars and banners, and I taught myself HTML to build my first website, which, yes, was a place to host my West Wing fan fiction. But always, always, those things were done in secret, because it was deeply embarrassing and really uncool, and I lived in fear of people in my real life finding out that this is what I was doing online, like accidentally printing something I'd written to the office printer or emailing a friend logged into the wrong account. Meanwhile, in my public journey, I started doing a lot of work with technology companies, and that meant a period of overcoming imposter syndrome for me, because I didn't think I was a technology lawyer. I didn't give myself any credit for the skills that I had taught myself. I mean, technology lawyers were people who negotiated large-scale enterprise software agreements and satellite procurement contracts and God knows what else. But it turns out, of course, I was a technology lawyer, in as much as there is any such thing, because I had been living and breathing the online environment for years. It was my native habitat. And so when a new generation of Kiwi founders started building these world-beating technology companies right here in New Zealand, they needed a professional advisor who understood what they were doing. And it turned out that was me. But the more time I spent with tech company founders, the more I realized that this public career I had built for myself wasn't one that I wanted. And so when this guy offered me a job, I jumped at the chance to change tack. This is Rowan. I now run his family office, which combines investments in early stage tech companies and a philanthropic foundation and a really good feijoa orchard. And one of the things that's amazing about my new job is that I get to talk really openly about the things that I care about. And last year, that meant giving a talk about One Direction and how it might hold the answer to at least part of the tech sector's diversity problem. Some of you might have seen it or read it online. You can find it on my site if you're interested. But I'll give you a 30-second recap so that you can understand the rest of this journey. It's a talk about how these 5 boys went from being failed reality TV show contestants to one of the most successful musical acts of all time. A musical act I didn't pay any attention to until I stumbled on this epic online conspiracy theory about a possible secret gay relationship between Harry Styles and Louis Tomlinson. And it's a talk about how if you bang on enough about a boy band conspiracy theory, your friends are all going to think that you're crazy. And everybody's going to ask you if you're for real or if this is just some elaborate example of hipster irony. And it's about how that's not new. We've been dismissing the things that young women get excited about for eons, creating this weird double standard where it's okay to be obsessed and hysterical about some things, but not others. And in the midst of all that, it's about me rediscovering that fans make gorgeous digital art and they teach each other to manipulate images and to make memes, and that right under our noses, there's this generation of young women who are self-taught front-end developers and graphic designers and community managers who are immersed in technology, and we're not paying any attention because they're doing it in service of something we don't care about. So there's this pipeline of young women who should be in our industries and aren't, because we're still teaching them that the things they care about are embarrassing, and because they don't value the skills they're teaching themselves as being worth anything in the real world. So I didn't really expect that talk would hit home quite as much as it has. I've been fortunate enough to give it in Berlin and in Wellington, in London and San Francisco, and in-house at companies like Twitter and Slack. And one of the things that happens every time I give this talk is that people get in touch with me afterwards and make their own confessions. So they email me and they tell me about their own unconventional pathways into careers in tech. Like this guy who grew up gay in a rural environment and thought that he needed to get into creative arts to get out, even though, like me, he was nerding out with his computer magazines in his bedroom. They confess their own secret fan obsessions. Like this woman who describes herself as very not young, but totally into K-pop. And amazingly, they confess the first things that they ever built and shared online. And so Anil tweeted this out not long after I'd given the talk in Wellington, and the responses are a great sample of the kinds of things that people tell me about. A members page for Star Wars Rules with a Z. Recaps about Temptation Island. I hate myself. Neopets is an amazing one. Neopets completely passed me by, but the number of people who say that their first experience with design or development was Neopets is enormous. Horses, so embarrassing. I loved this pivot from a site dedicated to a minor character on Highlander the series to a Sailor Moon site inside of 9 months. A 64 fan site complete with Comic Sans welcome gif. And this exchange really stuck with me because Elizabeth, talking about her No Doubt fan site, said, you know, at 12, it's really validating to feel that you're not alone in the things you love. And Anil responded saying, or at 42. And she said, yeah, as soon as I sent that, I thought, nope, still true. And that's the crux of it, right? Why are we embarrassed about these things? Why do we disclaim them by saying, I hate myself? This is a blog post that someone wrote after I gave the talk in Wellington. I don't know who this is, she was writing anonymously. But she was talking about working in web and knowing a lot of women in tech who are also in fandom. But hearing me talk about it in a work context at a work conference really unnerved her, even though I was speaking directly to her experience. And she didn't feel that she could go back to work and talk about it with her colleagues. And worse than that, she worried that the guys around her were dismissing it out of hand. And she was confident that they weren't feeling as exposed as she was. This is outrageous, right? Why are we making each other feel this way? I realized that we all have something that first inspired us to make and to share. This is mine, Dinosaurs. This is the first book I ever wrote. You can tell it's a non-fiction masterpiece because it covers the later ones and the early ones. And I was a design genius because inside I flipped it, early ones and later ones. And it's got a chapter on my favorite dinosaur, the Brachiosaurus, who when he was frightened just hid his head under the water. It seemed really obvious when I thought about it for even a moment. Of course course, the first things we make out of and in dedication to the things that we love. And that doesn't matter whether it's sports teams or movie stars or musicians or dinosaurs. There's always something that inspires us. The first pictures that we paint and draw as kids, the first stories that we write, and yes, the first things that we make and share online. They're always going to come out of the things that we care most about. But then somewhere along the way, about the same time someone first tells you that something you like is lame, we start to learn that it's okay to be a fan of some things, but not others. We're all equally passionate about something, but our passions aren't treated equally. I love this scene from a movie. I haven't seen it, but I found it on Tumblr. And it's a scene in which one character is trying to understand why the other character enjoys the book Twilight.
This is the worst book ever written in English.
So there are worse books written in other languages?
Probably not, unless this book is translated into other languages.
Really? We don't need to do this.
No, please, let's. I need to know how you read these, I guess you call them sentences. Close the book and feel anything other than offended and sad.
Well, millions of people like it.
So when millions of people like something, that means it's good?
No, it means millions of people like it. These books make people happy. We don't always have to be thinking about poli-sci or reading Chaucer, which, by the way, I hated.
You're not supposed to like it.
Then why read it? You love college so much, right? Isn't it all about understanding different points of view?
It's also about developing taste.
That was snobby. You're a snob.
No, I'm not.
Yes, you are. You think it's cool to hate things. And it's not. It's boring. Talk about what you love and keep quiet about what you don't.
Somewhere along the way, we created this hierarchy of cool, right? Liking One Direction is embarrassing, but liking Harry Styles' solo album might be okay. Because if you're paying attention to the press coverage, he's leaving behind the teen girl hysteria that followed him around like a shrieking shadow. Harry's got a retro rock earnestness now. He's shaking off his boy band past. Just don't give those young women any credit for having been a fan of his all along, because what do they know about music, really? And I think Harry understands this probably better than most. In his Rolling Stone interview launching his solo career, he said, "Who's to say that young girls who like popular music have worse musical taste than a 30-year-old hipster guy? Teen girls like the Beatles. You're gonna say they're not serious? Teenage fans, they don't lie. If they like you, they're there. They don't act too cool. They like you and they tell you, which is sick." So where does all this condescension take us? To a place which Oren Shaw calls contempt culture. We earn credibility in our communities, in our workplaces, and online by dismissing things as uncool or lame or not as good. The New York Times can use the phrase demented 12-year-old's Tumblr feed as an insult, and we all know what they mean. But the things that they're dismissing, they're the things that young women get excited about, that young artists of colour get excited about, that young queer writers get excited about. And where does that take us? To an industry that's still predominantly male and overwhelmingly white, and an industry that's celebrating this single vision of what's cool. I've been thinking about this example this week. On the left is something most of you will probably have seen. It's called 17776, What Football Will Look Like in the Future. If you haven't, it's by John Boyce. Google it as soon as you get back to work. It's this amazing interactive fiction project which uses text and videos and GIFs to tell the story of space probes who have achieved sentience and are talking about what life is like in the year 17776, when humans no longer die and play these evolved versions of the game of football over hundreds of years and millions of miles. And this project is amazing. Like, everyone raves rightly about it. It's great. But this is what it reminded me of on the right. A piece of fan fiction written in 2005 in which the actors, the real people, not the characters, of the Lord of the Rings movies were members of a Belle and Sebastian-style indie band reuniting for a final tour. And this is a long story, and every chapter had these amazing multimedia artifacts, most of which have been lost to bad photo hosting. But like mocked up inboxes where you could click on the emails and read the characters' emails, mocked up ticket stubs and airline reservations, and notes written on the back of menus. And this story was intricate and well written and extraordinarily immersive. And I kept thinking about these two projects because this one, instant cool. But this one, a Lord of the Rings real person alternate universe fan fiction, are you going to send that link to your friends and your Twitter followers and say, hey, check this out? Young people are taught that their work is to be treated in secret, it's embarrassing, it's not good enough, not to be shared. We're all equally passionate, but our passions just aren't treated equally. And you know what? We're missing out because ferociously talented artists are online depicting the Hermione Granger of the Harry Potter books, not the movies. They're envisaging worlds in which Harry and Draco realized they were obsessed with each other when they were still at school, or maybe years later, after the war. They're thinking about what Dana Scully would have been like if she'd been into 90s grunge. They can't find themselves in the overwhelmingly white character set of The Sims, so they're modding their own. And they know that neither Betty nor Veronica are really that into Archie. Fans are passionate and creative and talented and hardworking and everything we need in our tech and design worlds. The Teen Vogue piece I mentioned at the start is this great piece by Arabelle Siccardi, in which she talks about how fashion was her first fandom. While I talk about One Direction fans teaching each other technological skills, she talks about how Lovin Kawakubo made her research pattern design making techniques so that she could more properly understand why what the designer was doing was so radical. She writes, teen girls are criticized for loving the wrong things and loving them in weird and unproductive ways, but the criticisms couldn't be more off base. They love things with a curiosity and a brilliance that makes them better for it. Loving things makes you braver and smarter. And I have some hope for a generational change. When I started out, talking publicly about these things was unthinkable. I have whole secret identities online dedicated to the idea of keeping my real life and my fan lives separate. But now, Tumblr artists happily post selfies alongside their art. They sell their fan novels self-published to the Kindle. They sell their art on Etsy and Redbubble. And that feels like a start. Hulu's recent campaign for The Handmaid's Tale is a great example of this. They started reblogging Tumblr artists' art as advertisements, and it was the first time I'd seen ads happily reblogged in my dash with tens of thousands of notes. Now, of course, the artists weren't paid for their work, and I'm not sure that they would feel comfortable yet putting it in their portfolio when they were applying for jobs. But it feels like a start, because once we get this pathway to legitimacy, then I think these things start to cross over. What if, instead of abandoning the things we loved or hiding them away online, we embraced our joy and we encouraged others to do the same? What if we found the things that we loved and created things out of that love and then shared that joy with other people? And what if we kept doing that our entire lives? So today, I want you to confess to someone your first dinosaur. And I want you to ask them about theirs. And then I want you to reassure them that you think they're equally cool. Maybe then we'll be on our way to creating an industry that a more diverse range of talents wants to be a part of. Hiring processes where we ask the candidates for the work that they are most proud of, regardless of what it's about. Office culture that doesn't force people to hide the things that they're excited about. Maybe if we start treating each other's passions equally, then we won't all feel like we're out on our own. And imagine what we might be capable of then. Thank you.